Declare recess at any time during today's hearing. Without objection, so ordered. I also ask unanimous consent that the members not on the subcommittee be permitted to sit with the subcommittee at today's hearings and ask questions. Without objection, so ordered. As a reminder, please keep your microphones muted unless speaking. Should I hear any inadvertent background noise, I'll request that the member please mute their microphone. To insert a document into the record, please have your staff email it to documentsti@mail.house.gov. This morning, I'd like to welcome everyone here to our hearing and thank our witness, Ms. Nina Albert, for joining us to discuss risk to the General Service Administration's real estate portfolio. We know the past 27 months have been overwhelming for families, businesses, schools, and workers. While adapting to remote work was challenging for many, its adaptation has been widely considered a success, and it's prompting workers and employers to reimagine how and where work gets done moving forward. How much office space will federal agencies need? This is a question particularly relevant to this subcommittee because we authorize the acquisition of space for the GSA. The GSA provides workspaces for 1.2 million federal employees in every state and territory across more than 50 federal agencies. Its public building service owns over 1,500 federal buildings and leases approximately 8,100 office buildings, courthouses, land ports of entry, data processing centers, laboratories, and other specialized space all around the country. With 60% of public building service leases expiring in the next few years and agencies contemplating new ways to do work, the government needs to rethink its real estate portfolio. Currently, when agencies seek workspace, GSA considers the amount of space needed, the type of space, the location, the neighborhood amenities, disaster risks such as seismic safety and fire protection, and most of all, the price. That last part, the price, is important because we need to be good stewards of taxpayer dollars. That's why I introduced the House companion to the BRIGHT Act, H.R. 7636, which would direct the GSA to install cost-effective and energy-efficient lighting in public buildings. This is a simple change that's estimated to save millions in taxpayer dollars while also making federal buildings more sustainable. As a result of the pandemic, GSA will also have to reconsider resilience, sanitation, airflow, spatial planning, and telework policies. This pivot will require GSA to consider how the built environment can help the government provide better services, attract and retain employees, and protect workers' health. The built environment also needs to account for the challenges and disasters we face as a result of climate change. Approximately 53% of PBS's portfolio is over 50 years old, and many of these buildings were constructed without considering the extreme weather risks which are present today. So I'm interested to learn more about how the GSA is managing climate change risk and how this factors into the repair backlog. GSA also has other challenges which need to be addressed. Persistent underfunding of the Federal Buildings Fund, outdated and damaged facilities, underutilized buildings, frustrated tenants, expensive short-term lease renewals, insufficient funding for new construction, damage to buildings from extreme weather events, and a slow prospectus approval process, which makes it extremely challenging for GSA to modernize and right-size its portfolio. That's quite a list of things to address, and we're anxious to hear your response to them. I'm aware of GSA's frustrations with Congress preventing full access to the revenues collected in the Federal Buildings Fund. But let me point out that since I became chair of this subcommittee, thank you to your help, Mr. Webster, our ranking member, we've eliminated the multi-year backlog of prospectuses, and we have already passed the FY23 Climate and Resilience, Consolidation, Energy and Water Conservation, Fire Protection and Life Safety, Seismic Mitigation, Conveying Systems, Fire Alarm Systems, and Judiciary Capital Security Program prospectuses. Having passed these prospectuses prior to the passage of the FY23 appropriations bills means that the authorizers can now return to regular order. So Commissioner Albert, I thank you for being with us and for participating in today's discussion. You see, we have a lot of questions. We're grateful for your testimony, and we look forward to hearing more about the risk facing GSA's real estate portfolio, if I have left some out. I would now open it to Mr. Webster, our ranking member, for his statement.
Thank you, Chair. I want to thank the GSA Public Buildings Commissioner for being here today. It's good to see you. As a matter of fact, it's good to see you in person. Last week, the committee passed those 8 resolutions for special emphasis programs and alterations that address different risks the GSA is in its aging portfolio. As a committee that oversees FEMA and disaster programs, we have a particular interest in ensuring agencies like GSA understand the risk of its facilities and are working with agencies like FEMA that have robust risk data readily available. FEMA has the National Risk Index, for example, which factors in 18 natural hazards and expected annual losses. This kind of data can help communities to make necessary hazardous mitigation plans. GSA also faces risk by holding into properties that no longer serve a need for the federal government. The Federal Assets Sale and Transfer Act, FASTA, was passed with the intent of not to just simply streamline the disposal process, but to get agencies to look more strategically at their assets. The goal is to produce results that could include sales, redevelopments, leases, and to other activities that make most sense financially and operationally. To achieve the significant changes, it takes the administration, including GSA and OMB, working together with Congress to get agencies to make better decisions about their space and to take new developments into account, like the increased telework posture and need for less space. It also means alternative financial options should be on the table as well. It makes no sense for the taxpayer to effectively pay for a building sometimes many times over through a lease only to have to pay fair market value in order to own it. GSA has legal authority to negotiate discounted purchase options and enter into public-private partnerships, but has not taken advantage of those authorities. GSA should use those authorities where appropriate to facilitate the right sizing of portfolio and reduce costs to the taxpayer. I hope we can work together to address GSA's growing deferred maintenance costs and ultimately reduce costs for the taxpayer through strategic investment. Thank you, Chair Titus, for the opportunity, and look forward to the testimony.
Thank you, Mr. Webster. I'd now like to welcome our witness, Ms. Nina Albert, who is the Commissioner of the Public Building Service at the GSA. Thank you so much for being here today. We're looking forward to hearing your testimony. Without objection, our witness's full statement will be included in the record. Ms. Albert, the floor is yours.
Good morning, Chairwoman Titus, Ranking Member Webster, and members of the subcommittee. My name is Nina Albert, and I'm the Commissioner of the Public Building Services at the GSA. I appreciate the committee's interest in GSA's capital investment program, and I look forward to sharing our outlook on the opportunities and risks facing GSA's real estate portfolio. I'll describe the importance of properly maintaining federal facilities, the financial risk to the government if we do not address mounting deferred maintenance, and the savings to taxpayers if we adequately fund GSA's capital improvement program. By putting the right tools in place, GSA can address deferred maintenance as well as modernize and optimize the real estate portfolio. This vision includes key national goals such as providing accessible facilities to tens of millions of members of the visiting public, to delivering flexible workplace environments for government employees, to ensuring physical security and cybersecurity in federal buildings, and achieving a net zero portfolio by 2045. So, how do we advance all of these priorities? At the end of the day, the solutions are relatively straightforward. GSA seeks to work with Congress to receive full access to the Federal Buildings Fund and to streamline the prospectus process. Without Congress's support of GSA's full access to the Federal Buildings Fund, much of the real estate in GSA's control will continue to suffer the consequences of deferred maintenance, the liabilities for which now equals $2.6 billion per year, and that will compound if it is not addressed. And GSA will continue to lease space out of necessity, which is not the most cost-effective solution for the government when we know that there is a long-term need. There are a number of potential options that would help unlock the full value of rent and other collections in the FBF. When I appeared before this subcommittee last November, Chair DeFazio noted that the FBF funding issue was similar to funding challenges around the availability of monies that were being deposited into the Harbor Maintenance Trust Fund, which Congress worked to resolve. I am eager to discuss potential solutions with you in this regard. By having full access to the FBF, GSA can consolidate agencies into federally owned facilities to avoid lease costs. We can reduce facility vulnerabilities due to extreme weather events, and we can modernize federally owned buildings to meet the evolving needs of agencies. We also seek to work with the committee on streamlining the prospectus process, because this would also improve efficiency within GSA's capital investment and leasing programs. A GAO report dated January 2022 recommended that GSA assess its prospectus processes and communicate its findings to our authorizing committees. I am pleased to be able to share our findings with you today. We evaluated the impact of adjusting the prospectus threshold from the current $3.375 million to a $10 million threshold. Even at the new threshold amount, roughly 60% of current projects and 80% of major capital projects would still be subject to the prospectus process and Congress's review. Our preliminary indicates, however, that we could save $50 million per year in avoided lease costs and costs in our capital repair program, as well as deliver our program 23 months sooner. GSA will also better be able to respond to emergency circumstances, which is vital to enabling agencies to perform their missions with minimal disruptions. Finally, I want to emphasize that there has never been a more important moment to make these improvements. On one hand, after 10 years of deferred maintenance, the condition of federal buildings is of concern. On the other hand, based on what agencies have learned over the past couple of years, GSA needs to have more flexibility to respond to agencies as they seek to modernize their mission delivery, update their customer service models, and evolve workplace solutions. Gaining full access to the Federal Buildings Fund and streamlining the prospectus process are two primary means to providing the flexibility that is needed to modernize and optimize the federal real estate portfolio. Thank you again for the opportunity to share GSA's perspective, and I welcome your questions this morning.
Thank you very much. We'll now move on to members' questions. Each member will be recognized for 5 minutes, and I'll start by recognizing myself. Earlier this year, I introduced the House Companion to the BRIGHT Act. I mentioned that in my opening statement. That BRIGHT Act has passed the Senate, and if the Senate can pass anything, it's a miracle, so, that's been done. I wonder if how you feel about that at GSA, if you would support changing out the light bulbs to be more cost-effective and more energy efficient in our public buildings.
We absolutely support any reforms and improvements that provide us the flexibility to invest in existing facilities, to dispose faster of underutilized facilities, and to make the improvements needed to make sure that our buildings are ready for the modern era. That includes extreme weather events, unfortunately. That includes greater levels of physical security. It includes including technology investments and improvements and access in our buildings, as well as obviously modernizing workspaces. So we always appreciate and support when Congress makes these investments and acknowledges that while we take buildings for granted, because we don't think about it until there is an event that occurs that disrupts operations, that impacts people's lives, we are always trying to safeguard against those extraordinary events, and we do that by providing a reliable and dedicated amount of funding to go ahead and make those improvements on a day-to-day and year-to-year basis.
Thank you very much. I'm glad to hear that, so maybe we can get that moving out of the House as well. You mentioned the weather conditions. That was going to be my next question. We said 53% of your portfolio is over 50 years old, 28% is over 75 years old. And when many of these buildings were constructed, it was during a time when flood maps weren't very accurate and didn't reflect the kind of risk that we're facing today. We've got 100-year floods and 500-year floods. And it's not just flooding, other things occur too, but you're vulnerable to a multitude of disasters. You're in a great need of repair. You've got a backlog. Can you talk to us a little bit about how you address flood and sea level rise that's posed to some of our existing buildings? And are you collecting data and on the assets about how old they are, what they need, what their problems are, that sort of information that would be helpful?
Yeah, thank you so much for this question. This is of top concern for us. Since 2017, we've had 59 buildings subject to some sort of extreme weather damage. That includes floods, but of course it also includes tornadoes, hurricanes, other types of damage as well. So being able to address and repair those facilities so that workers and the visiting public can continue to have access to those buildings is of concern to us. So there's a number of different things. One is taking a proactive approach, making sure that we are studying FEMA's, Mr. Webster mentioned the national index, so incorporating data that is being provided by other agencies, and making sure that as we make capital plans, that we are anticipating and using that data so that those capital investments allow us to secure that building for a long-term future, irrespective of extreme weather events. The other side of the coin, of course, is making sure that we have the flexibility to repair buildings so they can get back into service as quickly as possible, which is, again, why I proposed this morning discussing with the committee full access to the Federal Buildings Fund. And as I mentioned, even by accelerating the prospectus process, we could be saving $50 million and be able to address emergency repair as needed. There's a big opportunity here, as I mentioned, to be proactive in our planning and looking at our portfolio across the board, making sure that we understand what investments needs to be made when there is a risk presented to those facilities, and then going ahead and making the investments necessary to secure the safety of that facility over the long term.
When we talk about infrastructure, we hear a lot about building back better. We don't want to just build back to status quo ante. We want to build in resilience for what may come down the road. So is that a part of your consideration as you look at the inventory and try to repair some of this damage?
Absolutely. You mentioned the age of our buildings, there's two ways that predominantly affects us. Number one is the age of the building system itself. It's at the end of its useful life. When we modernize and put in efficient buildings, we're now able to save, on average, 80% on the greenhouse gas emissions, just based on a systems upgrade alone. As it pertains to protecting against flood, and other types of damage like that, those are more significant capital investments, and that's what the Climate and Resilience Special Emphasis Program is for, and I want to thank the committee for approving and moving that special emphasis program forward.
Well, thank you very much. I now recognize Mr. Webster for 5 minutes.
Thank you, Chair. Commissioner Albert, looks like costs of items in every area of life are going up. Inflation is there. And I'm sure in your arena, especially in infrastructure of buildings, plus I guess land also, it's being affected by those costs. What are you seeing? What are you doing? How are the costs impacting the general operation of GSA, especially in the construction of new projects?
Well, thank you for that question. Obviously, this is of utmost interest and concern to the construction industry and real estate industry at large. From a buildings operation perspective, we haven't seen significant cost increase from that side. That's where our buying power and the contracts that we have in place have set prices, and we've been able to manage those costs pretty well. Where we're seeing costs rise is around certain types of materials, labor shortages in many cases. And in those cases, we're looking at our portfolio of projects and having to make adjustments. They can be sometimes scope changes. They can be a different phasing plan to be able to deliver the project within budget. And then it can also include in more challenging times, even removing certain projects off the plate or waiting until we're able to deliver them. So these are the tools that are available when we face circumstances like this and are having to manage to a fixed budget in an environment where there may be escalating costs. What's incredibly important for any manager of a major portfolio like ours is to have sustained and dedicated funding year after year, because we can then plan to manage around momentary cost changes. It's a sort of a fundamental management axiom for people who are managing major capital investments, is the longer we can have a 5-year or a 10-year capital improvement plan, we can manage to the immediate market circumstances. And that's, I think, a key part to this moment where everyone's trying to manage the specific cost increases that we're seeing in the construction industry.
So let's say last case scenario, you don't know exactly what to do. You're in the middle of something, they're building it, and all of a sudden the costs are going to be more. Do you have any ability to modify what's being done?
We do. It depends on what the circumstance is. As you know, GSA works very closely during the procurement process with the contractor. We often try and negotiate a firm fixed price, or a guaranteed maximum price. So the projects that are already underway have already planned, are being planned according to the budget that the contractor's committed to. When there are unusual circumstances, there are provisions within our contracts that allow us to negotiate around whatever that, what we call force majeure event might be.
Yeah. So also in the area of courthouses, there's been, there was a study 10 or 12 years ago about the cost, the actual courthouse being larger than what was approved. And that certainly costs more money than what we have. What are you doing to make sure that what's approved, what's talked about, what's voted on is what we're doing?
Well, we're working very closely with the Administrative Office of the Courts, and they've been a fantastic partner. They are seeing the opportunity to modernize their facilities as a result of what they've learned over the last 2 years during the pandemic and what they know their future workforce is going to, how they're going to use space. So the past 10 years have been a great collaboration. I believe that we've worked very closely with the courts to make sure that design standards are put in place and that the budgets that are developed are current and also communicated. There are changes that occur during the course of any project, and we work closely on those scope changes with the courts to make sure that, that they are being properly managed.
Thank you very much. Yield back.
Thank you, Mr. Webster. We'll now go to the other members of the committee, and I'll recognize them for 5 minutes. First, we have Ms. Van Dyne.
Thank you very much. I appreciate everybody being here today. Most Americans are getting back to work, and that includes getting back to work in the office. In the State of the Union, President Biden said it's time for Americans to get back to work and fill our great downtowns again. People working from home can feel safe to begin to return to the office. We're doing that here in the federal government. The vast majority of federal workers will once again work in person. But from what we've heard from constituents, from what I have seen, and it's constituents who are actually acting on, working with our government agencies, that really does not appear to be the case. I understand you can only speak on behalf of what the GSA is doing right now, but as the government landlord, you should be leading by example. So, Ms. Albert, I'm going to ask you, how many GSA employees are back in the office full-time right now?
I don't know the exact number to that. What GSA has always been a leader and sort of on the leading edge of hybrid work. We've been practicing in a hybrid environment for over a decade. And so as a result of the last couple of years, we've been reevaluating which positions qualify for remote work, which positions qualify for hybrid, meaning
of those positions, how many are back in the office 5 days a week?
I'm not sure that any are back in the office 5 days a week, but we're also not aiming for that outcome. What we're really looking to do, and I would say that this is
How many days on average per week are they at the office?
I don't know that I can provide an average. I can tell you what I do, which is I'm in the office between 3 and 4 days a week, and so is my supporting staff.
What about other leadership in DC?
I would say that we're in a period of flux, and this is across the country in private sector as well. There are very few organizations, private or public, that are in the office 5 days a week.
I could tell you, our office is in the office. Our staff is in the office, both in DC and in the district, because that's where constituents call, that's where constituents come for help. But from a leadership perspective, this is your team. I would hope that you would know how often that they're in the office. This is a team that you're working directly with.
We are actually encouraging hybrid work so that we can fully understand it, so that we can serve agencies that are interested in engaging with hybrid, remote, or office-based work as effectively as possible. This is an opportunity that
Can you just give me an idea? I know that we use that term, but I don't know what hybrid means. I mean, I know it's a mixture, but is it mostly at home? Is it mostly in the office? I know at HUD, I think it's like 1 day, a pay period, they have to come back in the office. What's GSA doing?
GSA,
Certainly
it depends.
you have a policy. It's just not a one-off, right?
No, it's not a one-off. We've actually been systematically working through each position. This is what best practices are to look at what is the requirement of the position and how should it be qualified. Should it be?
So you're telling me at GSA right now, you don't have a standard, that each position is different and how many days that they come to the office, each position?
We have a standard by
policy?
position, that's correct.
Okay, and what does that range from?
It ranges from fully remote, hybrid, to on-site.
Okay, and then how many would you say are fully remote? What percentage?
6%, I believe.
Okay, and then what's the others?
Let's see, on-site is about, and please don't quote me on these numbers, this is an estimate. On-site, fully on-site, 5 days a week. Those are our building managers and people who provide, on-site services. That's about 10%. And the vast majority is in a hybrid mode. Hybrid means anywhere from 1 day a week in the office to 4 days a week in the office. So that's what the spread is. This is, again, very typical. This is the norms of the private sector as well as public sector. We are all competing for qualified talent in the future. And we know that the current generation, after experiencing working from home for the last 2 years, as well as future generations, are going to anticipate and need and want flexible work styles.
Yeah, and I think flexible is one thing, but going back to the office one day every 2 weeks is probably not exactly what makes the best team work together. But if GSA is in charge of government office space, wouldn't it be in your best interest to actually have the office buildings filled again? I mean, otherwise, are we looking at shrinking down that footprint? And you're spending a lot of rent on empty office space right now.
Well, right now, what I think the opportunity is to have fewer buildings and better buildings. I think that there is an opportunity to reevaluate our portfolio and take those facilities that are underutilized and put them to better use by either
I hope we
offering.
can do that soon. I yield back my time. Thank you very much.
Thank you. I now recognize Ms. Napolitano. Ms. Napolitano?
Yes, ma'am. Thank you, Madam Chair.
Thank you.
Commissioner Albert, two of GSA's strategic plan priorities are developing virtual workspace solutions and disposing of underutilized facilities. What actions has the Public Building Service taken to address this?
Sure. Thank you so much for your question. We're doing two things concurrently. The first is we are looking at our assets again. We're scrubbing them completely and trying to determine which ones are long-term strategic holds for the federal government that we should continue to invest in, that we should properly maintain, that we should upgrade and renovate to withstand future climate events.
Is there a list of priorities that you can share with the committee so we know what you're working on and what has come up as a priority for you?
Sure. I mean, the priority for us is to make sure that we have a financially and environmentally sustainable portfolio. That work incorporates disposition of underutilized properties, reinvestment in assets that we know that we're going to hang on to, and there is a tremendous opportunity, and this is where we're working with agencies to determine how they're going to be using space in the future and making sure that when there's an opportunity to consolidate space, that we're doing that. And ideally, when we have a federal building available, consolidating them into federal space. So this is, all of those activities take place concurrently. We are working very actively, and as you saw in our...
Pardon me. Do you have a report that will show what your priorities are?
Yes, actually, well, we have a report that's deliverable to Congress. Let's see, I think it would be in September, and so we look forward to sharing the results of that report with you here shortly this fall.
The committee, would you please? And then your testimony noted that delayed actions have increased the projects cost by 122 million. And how these delays in repair and maintenance impact your ability and the portfolio in climate resistance?
I'm sorry, could I ask you to repeat the question? Unfortunately, it was hard to
Delayed
hear.
Delayed action has increased project cost by 122 million. How do these delays in repairs and maintenance impact GSA's ability to make its portfolio more climate resistant?
Thank you so much. What I think I understood was that that delays in project delivery can impact our ability to make buildings more climate resistant. Okay.
Yes.
Anytime that there is limited flexibility in how we manage the portfolio, as well as delays due to burdensome process, all of those delays compound our ability to react quickly. Whether or not there's an immediate event that we need to respond to so that we can recover, or whether or not we're planning in advance to make upgrades to a building. These are the fundamentals of what I hope to work with the committee on in the near future. We need to have access to the Federal Building Fund so that we can plan in advance, as well as have the flexibility to invest when needed during times of emergency or even times of basic repair. The acceleration or the improvements to the prospectus process is also about addressing speed. The GAO report estimated that the prospectus process in its current form takes about 23 months. That is 2 years that a facility isn't repaired when it could have been. That's 2 years that an agency is
What can
delayed
you
in
do to
getting
cut the
into a
red
lease
tape, ma'am?
space.
What can you do to cut the red tape?
Well, this is what we'd love to talk to you about. I think fundamentally, when GSA collects rent and other proceeds, that populates the federal building fund. 12 years ago, we used to have reliable access to the full amount of rent that we collect. That's estimated today between $10 billion to $11 billion. We've been shortchanged by about $1 billion per year, and unfortunately, where that money is coming from is from the capital improvement program, almost exclusively. The leasing.
Why have you been shortchanged?
That's just the fix that we're looking to make in the federal buildings fund, is to be able to get full access year after year. That's why the Harbor Maintenance Trust Fund example or model is of interest to us. That's how that fix was made, so that the Army Corps of Engineers could have access to the funds that it collected. We're seeking something very similar.
Thank you, Madam Chair. Thank you, ma'am.
Thank you.
Thank you. I don't see anybody else to ask any questions. Ms. Norton was going to try to come back, but she hasn't. Just to follow up with that, and then I'll see if Mr. Webster wants to ask any more questions. Where does that money go? How do the appropriators use that, or does it depend on the year?
It depends on the year. I don't have the full history. In some cases, it's been to make technology investments. In other cases, it's been for other things. So it's been variable depending on the past 10 to 12 years.
I just want to say thank you for appearing today. It's been good. I look forward to working with you on many of these problems and also coming up with solutions that will work for all. Thank you.
Thank you, Mr. Webster. I think we can look again at these problems that you mentioned. I want to ask you a couple of questions. I know that you don't directly oversee the VA, but that sometimes you work with the VA, and they do a terrible job of managing buildings. I think about the hospital that was near Denver that went over budget so much and took so much longer and all that. How's your working relationship with them?
Our relationship with the VA is good, and it gets better and better. We work pretty closely with them on both leasing actions that we use our lease authority to acquire outpatient clinics, for example. And they have been talking to us about their interest in partnership around construction practices. You know, GSA has been, deploys all of the tools available in terms of construction management. And so we have a great depth of knowledge in this space, and the VA has been talking to us about that. You know, a lot of the different portfolios are fairly complex, and we're really stepping into a place of becoming a partner for different agencies, not only so they can learn best practices, but in many cases where maybe we can augment their delivery of projects. And so that's the scope of what we're looking at right now, bringing industry best practices to all of government.
That's good. I'm glad to hear that. I hope they'll listen. One other quick question. What's happening about the FBI building? We know that money's there. We know it's in terrible shape. We know it's been a controversial decision. Can you bring us up to date on that?
Sure. We recently briefed the committee on the viability of the 3 previous sites that were identified. Just to remind you, one was at Greenbelt Metro Station, another one in Maryland, another one was at Landover, also in Maryland, and then the third site is at the Franconia Springfield Metro Station in Virginia. So we assessed those sites because they were based on a significant consolidation previously, and they're still available. We talked to each of the landowners of those properties. All 3 sites continue to be viable. What we're working on right now with the FBI, in accordance with the President's FY23 budget request, is a consolidated suburban campus at one of those 3 sites where at minimum 7,500 employees would relocate to, but also working on a 750 to 1,000 person presence here in downtown Washington, D.C., so that there can be proximity to the Department of Justice and the White House. We've had a very cooperative and positive set of conversations, and what's going to happen next is looking at site selection. So how will we choose, and what are going to be the criteria for choosing among those 3 sites?
Thank you. Will you keep us posted on that, today on that?
Absolutely. It's of utmost importance, and as you may or may not know, my career was built as an economic development and real estate professional in this region, and I know how important this project is.
Thank you. Ms. Van Dyne, are you still there? Is she gone? Is Ms. Napolitano still there? Well, all right, you're set. Well, thank you very much. It's been helpful. You've laid out 2 major things we need to work with you on, and we're happy to do that and willing to. It sounds like we can make some improvements there. So that will conclude our hearing. I'd like to again thank you for your testimony. The comments were, as the script says, very informative and helpful, but even more than that, we appreciate your being here. I ask unanimous consent that the record of today's hearing remain open until such time as our witness has provided answers to any questions that may be submitted to her in writing. I also ask unanimous consent that the record remain open for until such time as our witnesses provided those answers. I also ask unanimous consent that the record remain open for 15 days for any additional comments and information submitted by members or the witness to be included in the record of today's hearing. Without objection, so ordered. The subcommittee now stands adjourned. Thank you.